Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has been dedicated to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, Sean and I meet with Stasia Sienna, who is an artist faculty member at Roosevelt University's Chicago College of Performing Arts, where she teaches group classes in the Alexander Technique to musicians and actors. What is the Alexander Technique, you may be asking? Well, let's dive in and find out.
Thank you so much for doing this. I've been looking forward to this for months.
Oh, thank you for asking. It really is such a pleasure. I was thrilled when I got the initial invitation, Lauren. Thank you for reaching out. It was such a good way to kind of set the stage for the new year, but we moved. So we're in a new house. And so it was kind of like, when am I going to get set up? So this is like a whole different space. And I'm really been looking forward to it so much. It's really a great honor. Thank you, Sean, for thinking of it.
Thank you. Thanks for making the time. After you and I had met in New Hampshire last year, I'd sent a note to our team and I said, we have got to get Stasia to do an episode with us. And so I've been looking forward to this since last year. And let me just say, even though we had a limited time together, I have thought about you every day since we met. No, and sometimes I'm like, Stasia in my head again. I can tell you, very few people have had that kind of impact on me. And so you really had got me thinking differently about my work and about my play. And so I thought it was so valuable the time we had together. And I thought this would be great for our team to hear this conversation between us.
Wow. That really, it means so much to me. And actually just a little anecdote like this, that is only the second time in my kind of long career, I've been at this a while, that someone has talked about kind of the voice in their head. And I was just going through some old email, and I did a lot of work with DePauw University. In the last 5, 7, 8 years, they were very interested in bringing wellness to their musicians. And my contact there, Sean, became a very dear friend who had no experience like you with the Alexander Technique when he first came to it and got, inspired to bring me in. And very, very sadly, he passed away from a really difficult liver illness. And I just saw an old email from him where he talked about, he was getting up off the floor and he said, Stasia, forever, I'll have your voice in my head. And so it's especially dear to me, having just seen that note from Stephen, that you mentioned it, because that's such a great honor to think that you kind of carry that work with you and you've integrated it into yourself, which is really, what we hope for. And Sean, I have to say, looking at you, here we are almost a year later, you have integrated so much into yourself that I can still see the remnants of the work that we did and all those seeds that were planted. So hats off to you for, listening to that voice. Thank you for letting me take up residence.
Every time I give a client presentation or a talk in public, or even sitting in front of my computer and biking, skiing, running, you're right there telling me, here's what I ought to be doing, and I can't shake it. So you really had an impact on me, even with that little bit of work we did together.
Yeah, thank you. And that was my question I wanted to ask you, was where you notice it the most, because obviously, we had this initial connection with your Alphorn passion, and we met at Kendall Betts Horn Camp, which was kind of, in some ways, what a funny thing to have us both in this sort of little niche world, that I'm not a horn player and you have this whole other big life in business and with your company, and to kind of meet you there it's always a really wonderful opportunity for me to meet folks who are looking at how they integrate this work into their bigger lives. So, we have a lot of students that come, especially to Kendall Betts, who are, they're horn players, they're aspiring horn players. But so I'm really thrilled to hear that the broader impact of the work, which it doesn't, Alexander technique, all the things that we did, of course they don't, they apply to a horn player, that they apply to anyone in a body, anyone with a brain. So I was curious, as you started talking, like where you've kind of been most surprised by how you have been reminded of our work together, and where it's come up for you. I mean, you just mentioned some of that, but I'm really curious because we talked so much about the horn that it's wonderful to hear that you took those strides on your own to start integrating it, which makes you the 5-star student, Sean.
Well, that's sweet of you to say. I mean, as I said, I speak in public a lot, and so I think about our work together before I'm delivering a speech in front of clients, when I'm doing client presentations, which is almost every day, and I think about a lot of the things that in your instruction. But I think what has been really interesting is that I've been a skier my whole life, and I guess I intuitively knew that there was this connection between my feet and my torso, and I've given a lot of coaching. I've taught a lot of people to ski, and I can watch a skier on a mountain and determine what they're doing well or not in their form, and I think that connected a lot of dots that I've had over the years. I ski a lot in the dark. I do a lot of training where I'm skiing early morning, and I've noticed that even in the dark, where I don't have my sight to help me with balance, I really notice this relationship with my feet and the rest of my posture and whatnot as I'm skiing, and especially in the dark. So it just, like I said, you have, it really permeated so much of my thoughts in all of the activities that I'm doing.
Really amazing. And of course, now I want to hear all about skiing in the dark and what comes up, because, this is a really interesting realm so the work that I do. I mean, one way that we can name it is, kinesthetic work, which is about building our awareness, right? So kinesthesia, our awareness of ourselves and how we move through space. But then adding darkness to that equation is a really interesting element, to take away all of those balancing points and to really center within oneself and begin to experience relationships within oneself and to the outside world in darkness. So, that's really fascinating that you have kind of taken that step further and learned so much from that. And, I had a really interesting student this past year. I'm on the faculty at Roosevelt University in Chicago College of Performing Arts. And I had a pianist who was completely blind since birth. And so your story really resonates with the last half a year when I worked with her individually. And it's fascinating. She actually learns music by Braille, which then has to be integrated, right? So it's that feeling like going down the side of a mountain and all those experiences and all the interaction with the equipment and sort of making that second nature. So it was really an interesting experience to work with this young woman who then didn't have the same kinds of habits that some musicians do, of being kind of pulled forward, seeing, to the music stand and the keys. But she had to really find ways to be centered and balanced without those markers. And it really speaks to me that you've done that work. You've kind of created that kinesthetic challenge for yourself to take away the light and the balancing points that we have when we can see out onto the horizon and all those things. And so again, like hats off that you, because I was really, I was sort of guiding her in that. And that's really, I probably said this to you in New Hampshire, that this work is ultimately about becoming your own teacher.
That's right. Well, so, I mean, we've got this big lead up of you and I met, and then I've had this constant thought about our work and time together since then. Talk about yourself and how you started down this path and studying this Alexander technique, which we'll talk about more.
Yeah, sure. I know I'm so compelled to kind of give a demonstration so that your listeners, your audience, kind of, you and I are in the know. But we've got, sort of this description of and kind of all of the ways that we can describe and demonstrate the work are, part of the journey of actually studying the Alexander technique. Maybe just one basic stroke as I talk about my own journey and my own experience is at the most basic level, we are looking at the habits that folks embody and working to help uncover which of our habits and the ways that we are in ourselves. And as you know from Kendall Betts, there's a lot of lingo, right? So this idea of how we use ourselves, well, you use yourself skiing, you use yourself in front of an audience. We all use ourselves, we interact with these devices. And we develop ways of doing that, some of them more advantageous than others. And some of those habits can be quite detrimental. So I don't even know if we really got to this at KBHC, as we call Kendall Betts, the Horn Camp, but I have scoliosis. I don't know, did I mention that to you?
Yeah. Yes,
Probably
you did.
did.
Yes,
Yeah.
you did.
So what I've come to understand more and more about my own self is that I sort of had this innate set of built-in habits, if you will. When you have a curvature in the spine, it does things, right? It's not just that the spine is curved, but there's also a rotation and there are imbalances and asymmetries. And so I'm in some ways kind of the perfect candidate to have ultimately come to this work. I didn't know it back when I was a student. So my undergrad was from Georgetown in foreign service. That was kind of before all of my mind-body work. So I'm a graduate of the School of Foreign Service. I don't know if we ever talked about that.
No, and okay, all right, bookmark that.
Okay.
Why were you studying foreign service? And
yeah, we'll bookmark that. We'll thank my grandfather was a diplomat. We'll thank Grandpa Gordon for the original kind of inspiration to get us all out into the world. But my undergrad was in Washington, D.C. And even at that time, before I knew anything, I was on this whole different path, languages and world and culture. I was always very aware of myself. And I realized in hindsight, even then, I was looking for a path. Like I was on the path, I was looking for the guideposts. I look back to even bookstores that I would browse books at, Kramer Books and Afterwards down on DuPont Circle in DC. And I was always gravitating to the not self-help in the terms of psychology transformation, but always insight into the body, because I innately knew that all these the sort of asymmetry, which had led to some pain. I was quite fortunate. I mean, this kind of the long circuitous answer around this, how did I come to the technique? But I did have at quite a young age, I was both aware that I had these asymmetries. I was diagnosed with scoliosis. I also began to experience some kind of, prohibitive, restrictive movement pain. So I was looking. And when I look back, so I went from Georgetown. I was always a passionate music maker, singer, classical singer in my heart, and I wanted to go on with my vocal studies. So I, do what everyone does. You go from this Georgetown School of Foreign Service to the Jacobs School of Music. at Indiana.
Goodness.
And it was really, it's all in hindsight that I was seeking answers. And this is what's so interesting about the synergy, of our relationship. You were looking, you didn't really know it until the people came into your path that began to be able to show you kind of ways to transform and change within yourself. But on some level, we all kind of know that we are looking, like you said, like you'd been an avid skier for a long time, like that light bulb was on. And so I think when folks have an activity, a passion, whether it's sports or music, it's using the bodies for these ways, in these ways where we need some access to refined, integrated coordination, the light bulbs start going on. So I really came to the technique initially just by folks that came into my path as I came into yours, who said, hey, have you thought about the Alexander technique? You're having some support problems in your singing. Have you thought about the Alexander technique? And I was like, well, I've got the best voice teacher. And what is this Alexander technique thing? And, lo and behold, I was a very, as I think a lot of us are, I was a kind of reluctant student. I was, medical model all the way. Send me to the neurologist, send me to the, orthopedic surgeon. And lo and behold, Sean, things started to unravel and change for me.
That's amazing. And I felt the same way. I have had a lot of people, a lot of coaches tell me, try meditation and try yoga, try these different things. And I have resisted all of that. And yet this work that we did together really was transformational for me. So I really identify with that.
Yeah, I think that's it's such an important element about Alexander work that there's an empowerment, there's agency. And I know we talked about that a lot, and it's also kind of inherent in my work. How do we create agency in another individual? How do we support that agency? You are your best teacher. You developing skill that then you can apply to other areas is ultimately so much more effective, so much more inspiring, so much more applicable than, I would love to be, not just the voice in your head, but skiing alongside you and saying, hey, Sean, forward and up, come up in a way, but then, if we can be so fortunate as to help empower another individual to carry that knowledge and that skill to build it over their lifetimes through their own self-awareness, then if you get inspired to do yoga at some point, your Alexander technique work, your awareness, all of that comes with you and is part of that activity as well. And so, I think that's, for me too, I found it a very smart set of principles. I found it to resonate with, not just, it was, the principles of this work are irrefutable. I mean, they're just the nuts and bolts of how we are put together as humans and how do we use ourselves well. That appealed to me, to think, well, we're learning so many things in this lifetime. Where would we be if we started with that? If we said, Sean, you're the most important element of your entire life. How do we ensure that you're functioning, performing, living optimally in this one mind body that you have? What a world it might be. So, that the kind of straightforward, no nonsense nature. And also I credit my own teachers, Joan and Alex Murray, with that, because they are very kind of, I call them orthodox Alexander technique teachers, but they also brought a lot of knowledge from their own discoveries of work with an incredible anthropologist, Raymond Dart, who was a South African anthropologist. We always remember him. He's the wonderful human who discovered Australopithecus, the little primate that connect in this sort of evolutionary idea. But even so, just as a skeleton, we all find Australopithecus in our middle school social science books, and the Murrays became very involved with DART. And I think a lot of what you learned, Sean, in my teaching is rooted in this particular synergy of Alexander technique as applied to movement. How do we move in these bodies? How do we use them well as we do things? And so, I think gravitating toward that with your sensibilities about the broad scope of your life totally resonates with my own. I said no to a lot of things before I became an Alexander technique teacher.
So talk about the history of the Alexander technique, and then I'd love to get into some of the principles that you and I talked about in New Hampshire.
Yeah, this is always the part of talking about the technique that every Alexander teacher starts to squirm a little, because as I may have said to you, there are Alexander technique teachers out there that will tell you you can't talk about this work. It makes it very, and there is some truth in the sense that there is this experience of being in one's self, and there is a history of teaching with our hands. It's a hands-on work initially, but there's been a lot of wonderful evolution from the beginning of Alexander work, or F.M. Alexander was the originator, so he was the founder of Alexander work. And I don't know, stop me if this is all, do you know all of this? We probably didn't talk about any of this, right?
We didn't.
I'll try to just kind of summarize, because I think it's really applicable to your life. You're already noting your applications of Alexander work to your public speaking and your performance, your performance in various areas. And I think for your team, in thinking about their own performances, it helps to understand that the originator of this work was a performer, and he was a Shakespearean actor. And the most basic kind of biographical sketch, his name was Frederick Matthias, F.M. Alexander. The most basic kind of groundstroke of his biography is that he was a Shakespearean actor who so he was quite widely acclaimed, and he would go out on stage and to, kind of great acclaim, and he was sought after as a performing artist, but he would lose his voice. And so as any good artist and, concerned individual do, he kind of sought out medical attention. And, as I often say in my master classes, it probably won't surprise you to find out that no one could find anything actually wrong with him, because there wasn't a defect in the vocal mechanism. And this is, kind of getting to the heart of Alexander work. His hoarseness, his losing his voice, had to do with how he used his whole body, of which the vocal mechanism is a part. So if you're somebody who constantly pulls down, collapses, pushes your head forward, in Alexander's case, he sort of pushed his head back a little, and he gripped the floor with his feet, which we're going to do this just for a second. And we'll do it in such a way that your listeners can actually do this when they come to this part of the podcast. But in the spirit of FM Alexander, just kind of grab onto the floor. In your shoes is fine, but just kind of grab on with your toes so that you're really holding on to the floor. Yeah? You got that, Lauren? Okay. And now just try to take a breath, just any kind of normal breath. Keep that grip going. And then let that exhale go out. And now invite some ease into your toes, even if they're in shoes, encumbered in the coffins of our shoes. Just let yourself now take a breath without that gripping of the toes. It's kind of crazy, right? What do you notice?
I felt like I could take in more volume, and interestingly, my shoulders, my back, everything just kind of aligned and allowed for that inhalation and exhale as well.
And what did you notice when you were gripping? How did it feel to try to take a breath?
That it was restrictive and
Yeah.
that I had almost like my torso was flexed.
Yeah, so this is, thank you. I mean, and Lauren, anything for you? Did you notice the same?
Yeah, it was weird. When you compare it that way, when my toes were clenched, I could feel the stress in my lower back and in my chest, and just like that stress of like breathing in. But when my toes were flexed, I could feel the breath kind of move through my body a lot easier. That was interesting.
Yeah, well, good, good. You all are functioning quite normally, right? This would be the normal response. We induce some stress into the body, and what we understand is that points of stress or tension or constriction or just habitual ways of using our bodies, they're not localized. The whole body is connected. So that's a very simple exercise to say, oh, well, who would have thunk that I grip the floor with my feet and actually my breath is somewhat restricted and impaired? And so, we credit and applaud Alexander because honestly, I mean, it took a special kind of human to do what he did. Just kind of applying that to his biographical sketch, what he did was he set himself up essentially as a scientific experiment. He put mirrors all over. Now he would have cameras. It'd be so much easier if Alexander were using, infinite, right? All of the technology that we have available today. But in his time, which was over a century ago, he was watching himself in mirrors and discovered, as I call it, it's like he became his own Sherlock Holmes. And this, Sean, is what you're describing. It's what's so beautiful about your application of this little bit of work that we did. When we become our own detective and we have a problem. So Alexander's problem was that he was losing his voice, which meant that he was losing his income, which meant that he was losing his opportunities, his following, his craft. So he set out to solve this problem. What is wrong with this integration? If there isn't an actual structural problem, then it's not rocket science. Something's going wrong somewhere. So Alexander set on this kind of life journey that he lays out. And strangely, I have the book sitting right here, so I'll show it to your audience. In The Use of the Self, which it isn't the greatest title page. You don't have to think gymnast, think any self, right? Even if you're not an athlete, you're a business person. How do you use yourself at your desk in front of your colleagues? How do you represent yourself? How do you use your mind body? So he sets out the experiment in that particular book of his 10 years of really noting what he did, watching himself with the eyes of a scientist. It's the only known scientific experiment on a living organism. He's been applauded in various Nobel speeches as really executing this incredible scientific investigation on the living organism. And he figured out for himself what he was doing. He figured out a set of habits that gave rise to the fatigue and the hoarseness. And there are interesting things about his own life. He was a premature baby. He already had probably some fundamental breathing constrictions that he began to work with. What he deduced was a more advantageous set of conditions in his body. And he set out to define principles of human movement that have now all been further investigated. And we're like, I mean, it's amazing. He deduced all of this just from watching himself.
And what year was this?
So Alexander was living at the end of the 1800s. He died in the in the 1950s. So yeah, at a time where, right, it's incredible what he was investigating at this juncture in history, all on his own. He was an absolute pioneer in mind-body study, kinesthetic awareness, integration. Forget about mindfulness, right? It's all the buzzword now. Well, Alexander was practicing, teaching, investigating mindfulness as applied to his own mind and body in 1890s, right? 100 years, over 100 years ago.
That's amazing. Stasia, I've noticed that not just when when you talk about athletes and musicians and artists using this technique when they have to deliver. And I've said that same thing, that when I'm in front of an audience or giving a presentation to a client or addressing our team, I'm really thinking about all of the things that you had asked me to consider. But also when I'm just writing and working, I spend a lot of time in front of my computer. And I think about the discussion that we had about if you're sitting at your desk or sitting in front of a computer, that just applying some of these techniques has helped my concentration. It's helped my endurance for tasks that typically, I might have been less excited about doing. And I've got this endurance too. I mean,
Amazing.
Can you talk about that? Is that I mean, a lot of our team and a lot of our clients, I mean, their work and their performance happens in front of a laptop or sitting at their desk, and so it's not. I want to stress that it's not just before you go to a competition or that you're delivering an idea in front of a client, that you can really apply these principles while you are doing thinking and writing and working in front of a computer.
I mean, I could say a lot, but you just said the very most important things. So I want to just acknowledge how sort of perfectly applied that is. And for your team to see it coming from the top, right? So this is really important because it is really this work when we have access to it and we can share what we have learned and what we know to be true with others. This is, again, these are the most fundamental sensibilities about how we are in ourselves. And you're absolutely right. We need that knowledge in our quietest moments of reflection on our own. Those moments prepare us for the presentation, for the ski down, for that, run down the side of the mountain. I mean, our experience in life in ourselves is cumulative. We can't just have some interaction fatiguing problem where we are constantly running ourselves ragged at our desks, at our computers, and then go out and bring our very best to some public presentation, right? This is all an integrative process. So in fact, you're really drawing attention to the most important part of how we are in ourselves, because it is 24/7. And so just, to kind of give your team a little concrete example, computer screen is in front of us. If no one has ever given another individual, or like you had never had instruction about the pull of this computer screen, right? Or I've got a phone here. That's another good example, right? The pull of the flat surface in this day and age, right? We have all these devices that draw our attention into smaller and smaller screens. So one very basic direction that you and I worked with, Sean, was this idea of up and away. Lauren just goes, whoa. So coming up and away from the computer screen when we're under a deadline, when we're intensely writing on a passage, when we're engaging with a client, right? There's so many things that pull us forward and down. And part of what we learn with Alexander's work is how to regain our full, what we would call height, and not favor forward at the expense of length. And that is happening every time we pick up one of these, every time we pick up a water bottle, all of this collapsing, all of this, and then never mind things like glasses, right? My glasses slide down here, and all of a sudden, I'm changing the trajectory of my eyes. So the interaction with the computer screen alone can be in that biography of Alexander, who wanted to solve his voice problem. Whoa, we have people in offices all over this world who are trying to solve their chronic back problem. And, you know, my friends that are listening to this, and Sean, this is something you and I talked about many, many times. There is nothing wrong with the back in terms of its structure, just like there was no actual structural problem in Alexander's vocal mechanism, his vocal folds. It was all healthy and fine, but the way he used himself impaired that. So your folks may be experiencing fatigue from not being able to breathe well because they're collapsed. They might be experiencing pain in the back, and it'd be interesting to see them watching this podcast going, yes, yes, my back hurts. A lot of folks pull the head and neck back, and then they kind of balance themselves like this and work at their computers. How do I come up and away, forward and away, full chest breath, and then put my mind back to my work, right? So I hope that'll give a little bit of a sense, right, of that's just one, what we call direction. Now, easier said than done. Then there's the sort of how do we do that? Well, how high your chair is, how your desk is arranged. There's a world of ergonomics, but here's the thing that I would also like your listeners to know. There's no perfect chair. There's no perfect desk. There's no perfect computer stand. There's no perfect keyboard. The common denominator in all of our life is ourself. So the more we can learn, you know, as you're so beautifully on this journey, the more we can learn how to wield this primary, what I call primary instrument. We are each our own primary instrument, and all of your team members are their own primary instrument. And you are so right in how do we increase our productivity in a world that tells us that more is more? Yet we have this experience and we know it to be true that more and grinding forward and grinding down can actually impair our ability to function well. We get sick, we get fatigued, we get run down, we get tired out, we get burned out. We're just done. So a big application of this work in kind of corporate settings is, you know, in the realm of preventative education, not medicine, education. How do we educate ourselves or the people we care about, our teams, our colleagues, to do better in themselves so that they can feel better, be more productive, be happier, have more freedom and poise and grace to also offer others, right? Because when we get burned out, there's not a lot left. So that's, you know, one of the ways in corporate settings where the folks in the office every day are experiencing chronic fatigue and repetitive strain problems. It is a chronic headaches, migraines, respiratory issues, carpal tunnel, all of these things that are a product of really having not enough education about the use of our minds and bodies. And that's a real travesty, that we have information that will help narrow that gap. We do.
So this idea that I've noticed that I have more endurance, I'm able to really focus and concentrate, especially when I'm writing for long periods of time. It really is physiological. It was just not just in my head that, oh my goodness.
It's not hocus pocus, Sean. It's not. It can feel a bit hocus pocusy, but it's, even if you drop your head forward, that 12, 13 pound bowling ball, right, is bearing down on the respiratory system. Well, what happens if I can come up to my let that go, find more ease? Beautiful, Lauren, there you go. And then, this is common sense that we give more space and ease, spaciousness to our self. And, we have more oxygen to the brain. I'm breathing differently. I'm not pushing down on all of my joints in my body. And some of these things that are just so simple of even just getting up, if you're someone who knows you have postural problems and issues, but you don't yet know really how to solve them, well, then my first word of advice, my advice would be, kind of along the lines of, first, do no more harm. So this idea of kind of doubling down into the deadline, into the things that need to get finished, we've got to start turning on those light bulbs, like in the dark basement, and going, well, what can I do for myself here that will be helpful? And one of the first things we can do is to stop hurting ourselves when our back is in pain. Get up and move, get up and breathe, find an Alexander technique teacher, honestly, and learn more about the mechanisms of the body. It is not hocus pocus.
So if you could give some simple advice to our team, and I know that there are a lot of elements to this, we have just talked about the very basic concepts of the Alexander technique, but if you're sitting at a desk, having your head back and up, your shoulders aligned, good posture, your hips are aligned with your shoulders, is that what you typically talk about in your instruction with your students?
Yeah, and I'll actually give the example of your wonderful Alphorn playing. Oh, it's perfect because you just picked up a pen, but your team knows you play the Alphorn, yeah?
Yes.
Some? Okay. So when you have this, and I've just got a Sharpie here, but so when I first met Sean, his tendency was to pull his head forward into the mouthpiece. That was a reasonable approach. He was trying to get air into that mouthpiece. He just had to get the information that habit he had developed was actually causing your chest to collapse, your shoulders to come forward. Yeah? So you're on the right track with those directions that you mentioned. But one thing I would add is, this is what we did with you, was you first had to stop doing this. You had to start noticing this was your go-to, this was your habit, and go, oh, no, now what? Now I have a choice. I have a choice to change. And this is where I would, giving advice to the folks in your company, to your team members, is start paying attention to the imbalances, the points of pain. If you're somebody watching this podcast who says, oh, I do that, my spouse, my child, someone in my life always says, stand up, get your head back. Start getting curious about what the thing is you're doing. And the first point of change is to make a choice to stop doing that and start letting that go. And the place that we will then instruct, like we did with you, will stop pulling the head forward and down. The opposite of that is backing up. for people in your office, if they just kind of turned their hands upside down like that and just encourage the head to kind of lengthen up, they might discover that in fact their coordination tends to be pushed forward. Oh, when I come up, my shoulders open. My hips are down here at the other end of the torso, and I can move at the hip joint. So as you said, there are a lot of then add-ons, but the first piece for folks helping themselves is to start identifying what the habitual pattern is. Is there a pull of the computer? Is there a pull of the phone? Is there a pull of the device? And start making a choice to say, well, instead of doubling down on that, I'm going to get my detective hat out and I'm going to start seeking some change. And a very easy thing, one thing you could really promote in the culture of your company is to encourage folks to not necessarily go to sleep on the floor, but if folks just lie down on their backs, put their knees up, little book behind their head, then gravity, and we talked about this at KVHC, right? Gravity just allows the body to kind of open, widen, lengthen. And I'm now, if this bottle were a human, I'm now in gravity, with gravity helping me to expand in all directions. Knees are up, feet are flat on the floor. So like a little A-frame. And I bet that when your team, they get up after even 2, 3, 4 minutes, right? You experienced this in New Hampshire. You get up and you go, oh, I'm freshly rejuvenated. I'm more aligned, right? What was your experience with that? And I mean, maybe encouraging your folks to try that.
One of the things that you had me focus on is how my alignment is laying on the floor, and then replicate that when I stood up. And that muscle memory or whatever it is that, I think about that a lot. And Stasia, I do this a lot throughout the week where I try to lay down for a few minutes, think about how my feet, knees, hips, shoulders, and head feel in that position, and then replicate that either standing or sitting. And that's helped tremendously.
Yeah. So I think you're giving so much insight, and being along for this ride with you both today, being able to kind of give some backdrop to what's so beautiful in this situation is that you're living it, Sean. You're actually living this in your life by example. You are thinking about these things and doing these things. And I think what is really important to foreground for your team is the amount of times that you have said, Sean, I'm thinking about this every day, right? I'm thinking about it every hour. I'm thinking about it because it's when we go on autopilot, which is what is really even preceding the doing anything about our posture, all of the things that we can do is to just turn on those gears, to start thinking about how we are in ourselves, noticing. And that becomes, as you're so beautifully articulating, that becomes life's work. This isn't that we just go to a yoga class and then I'm done, or I go to the gym and now I'm done. It's a process. And, it's not for the faint of heart, because we discover a lot of stuff about ourselves, don't we? And that thinking goes on all the time.
You've talked a lot about how movement and your position is so connected to thought and thinking. And I've noticed this too, that the clarity of my thinking and concentration tied to just these simple principles is remarkable. I mean, can you talk just for a minute about your
Sure.
experience of this connection between thought and movement.
Yeah. And I'll also, because you said it, and I think it's as important as the thought and movement piece, it's the mindset piece. It's that thought, we are a mind body. We are not a mind and a body. Our brain is our command central. And there's so much that one could investigate, and we don't have the time or space for that in this exchange. But our nervous system, this vagal nerve at the heart of, so our spinal column, all the nerves that connect our brain to everything else in the body. So the only way that we can, in fact, initiate change is with a thought. The hand doesn't function independently. It is a system of neurons firing, right? We have a thought. And so when those thoughts are, I'm fatigued, I'm burned out, I'm in pain, I'm over it, I'm done. We actually say about people, wow, he looks really down. What's wrong, Lauren? You look really down today. You okay? You look really down. Well, that's because people are literally down. The thought and the body and the energy and the whole integration pulls us in its direction. And conversely, it's like, oh, Lauren's having a great day. Look how up she is. Like, things are all fabulous, wonderful. Wow, what's going on? And so then we take that into all the movements of life. We take whatever that default thought mechanism is. It's like, I like to say, it's like taking, the weather. Like, we have our own little Gulf Stream, and our thoughts create a climate. And that climate is then impacting and informing all the movement and all the activities that happen in our lives. They're all connected to that thought pattern. So when we can even have the thought to have a thought, as you're so wonderfully describing this, like, oh, I'm going to work at my computer. Oh, I better turn the light bulb on, is what I always say. Then that action and all the other actions are in a climate that I would say is more kind of sunshine and roses, right? And life is not always that. But we do have some choices to not necessarily, if we're experiencing pain, problem, difficulty, heartache, hardship, trauma, despair, we will experience fallout, cascading effects of that in the body. And we begin to cultivate choices around that.
It's amazing. Stasia, this has been so fun reconnecting with you. And
so fun.
Like I said, you've sort of been with me along this path for the last year, and I really appreciate the time that we spent together in New Hampshire. It really has changed my thinking and changed my life. And thank you so much. And I can't wait to see you again soon. I know we're going to connect maybe next month, and I'll be in Chicago, and hope to see you there. If it's okay, we will link all of your social media and contact information in this episode so people can reach out to you. I know you do coaching for a lot of athletes and musicians and business people, and love to connect you to anyone that may have an interest in this. This work is so remarkable and very simple. It's not, that you've got to go work up to this for months. It's really in a short period of time, you can see noticeable change, and it's incredible.
Well, really, I mean, there is no greater evidence of change than seeing you after a year. And really, with all humility, if I would not say this if it were not accurate, but you do look like, I can see transformation in just the way that you're interacting with the screen in front of you, that you are monitoring, you're thinking about yourself in relationship to the space around you. And that's a real credit. And it's available to all of us to learn techniques of how to wield ourselves. And so it's really such an honor and to see you doing so well with this, and to also be in a place where you can inspire and offer to others around you that you're not just selling this down the stream. This is actually your starting point, and that it is impacting your life, your own life. And that's really why I do this work, to help people find that change. And then, when we're so lucky to pass it on to others. So I'm really grateful that you thought to invite me on for this really exceptional experience. I've just loved talking with you, reconnecting again. So nice to meet you, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Stasia. I thank you for helping me change my thinking on some of these principles, and thanks for carving out the time to be with us today. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care.